Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I am thrilled and so very honored to welcome Alonso Duralde to the podcast today to talk about Scrooge, released in November of 1970, starring the great Albert Finney in the title role. How are we doing, Alonso?
I am excellent. Thank you. How's it going?
Yeah, doing well. So I wanted to get started. I wanted to tell you I'm a big fan. I have to gush a little bit. I've been watching, your film reviews and listening to them and reading them for many, many years now. I discovered you on What the Flick many, many years ago. And as of now, if correct me if I'm wrong, you co-host 3 podcasts. You have
4.
4. Wow. Okay. Okay, so I know of Breakfast All Day, which I watch every week and listen to every week. It's great.
Oh, thanks.
And a film and a movie, which started last summer, I believe, which has been fantastic.
Oh,
and then Linoleum Knife, which just celebrated 10 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
10 years. So were you like the first podcast in 2010?
Podcasts had started before us, and I think we kind of caught this wave where like there were the early podcasts, and then podcasts kind of became a joke, and then suddenly everybody had one. And we were right there at that moment where nobody was quite sure if this was going to be a thing that was going to take off, and thankfully it did. And the only reason we even started one was because I was involved with a couple of TV shows that both got canceled within a very short amount of time, and I was like, I want a thing that only I can cancel. And so I talked my husband into doing this podcast, and 10 years later, here we are.
Yeah, and for you to be doing it so consistently for 10 years, right? That's fantastic, right? You feel, some people might have like done it for a couple of years and we're going to take a break. You've done it consistently, right?
Yeah, it's I think it's very handy to when it's a thing that you do at your house with your spouse. It's harder to have excuses of like not doing it, and because I'm having to keep up with contemporary movies for The Wrap and for my other shows. The 4th podcast, by the way, is one called Who Shot Ya?
Who Shot Ya? Okay,
for the Maximum Fun Network. So it's like you're already doing that part of the work, so it's like, oh, well, I might as well sit down for an hour on Sunday and talk about this stuff. So
So do you have time to watch just like other films? Like I feel like every week you have to be, everything you're watching kind of has to be for the podcast for the most part, right?
I try to squeeze in the occasional, like purely for recreation viewing when I can. But weirdly enough, it's sort of like those places that talk about when those processing plants where they use every part of the pig. Pretty much anything that I am watching for myself, I can somehow turn into something. Whether even if it's just a recommendation, or we do a show for our Linoleum Knife Patreon subscribers called Linoleum Knife Presents More Linoleum Knife, where we'll do just like a 20-minute episode that's solely focused on one movie. And so that way, if we watch some bizarro thing late at night on TCM, it's like, well, we can turn that into a more episode. So
anything that you come across maybe a little bit more randomly, you can touch on it at some point in one of these podcasts. That's fantastic. Exactly. And you are the film critic for The Wrap, which I wanted to, for any listeners who might not know, which is fantastic. I love reading your pieces there as well.
Thank you.
So I've been listening and watching you for many years. I wanted to start by just questioning you about, where your love of film began. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about that. Was it something that was just started when you were very young? Was there a certain film that kind of inspired your love for movies? If you could talk about that a little bit.
It's weird. I grew up in a household that was not necessarily encouraging of me doing this for a living, but definitely one that loved movies a lot. My mother especially was a big fan of film and would watch movies on The Late Show. And I grew up in the 70s in Atlanta, and there were a couple of repertory theaters there. So if somebody was going to be screening something like the William Wyler Wuthering Heights or certain like Hitchcock movies, like we would pile in the car and go, and so I when I was very young, I think I sort of learned to read by looking at the movie page in the newspaper in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I could tell you what was showing at any theater within about 20 miles of our house, even though I wasn't even really going to movies yet or fully getting the concept. So I'm kind of like that kid in Searching for Bobby Fischer, who watches 2 people playing chess, and it just like fires up his brain, even though he doesn't know what the rules are yet. So it just kind of went from there. And I grew up in the Siskel and Ebert moment, so when I was a kid, that was appointment viewing every week. And
Absolutely.
it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, I've been watching, Siskel and Ebert when I was a kid, and after that kind of went off the air, Ebert and Roper was no longer a thing. It took me a few years to kind of find that kind of program that I really liked, and it honestly was What the Flick. That really brought me back to, that cold kind of sparring, even though it was, 3 or 4 of you instead of 2 of you. Yeah, it's been a great show, and then going into Breakfast All Day, and I'm really happy that you continued with it, and it's been appointment viewing for me every week. So absolutely.
Oh well, thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I also want to mention you have 2 books: 101 Must-See Movies for Gay Men, and Have Yourself a Movie Little Christmas, which
is more relevant to our discussion today.
Yeah. So and that takes me to just I'm very curious to know, like, what inspired your love of Christmas movies? Has that been something that's from being a kid too, or?
Yeah, I grew up loving Christmas. I'm the youngest of 7 children, so it was always a very big deal in my house, and I was kind of the change of life baby, one might say. Like my mother had 6 kids in 8 years, and then 5 years later I was born. So much older siblings, but we get along well. But Christmas was when everybody came home, so like all the college students or whatever. So it was always a very exciting time in my house, and there was a lot of food and a lot of just things happening. And so I love Christmas and I love movies, so eventually it would become the two would dovetail together. And again, from the 70s, I grew up in that era when like It's a Wonderful Life was always on television because it was during that public domain moment. So like every channel was airing it, and it would end on one channel and you'd flip channels, it would just be starting somewhere else. So getting to write this book was a fun experience because it really introduced me to a lot of ones I didn't know. And I would sort of make the comparison of like, you grow up, at least we did in the pre-internet era, where like, your parents have 4 Christmas albums, and that is the extent of what you think Christmas music is. And then you get older and you find out, it's not just like Bing, Dean, Andy, and the Boston Pops. Like there's all these other options out there, and so for movies, I think a lot of us grew up with like, well, this we watch It's a Wonderful Life every year, and maybe like White Christmas or Miracle on 34th Street, but there's all this other stuff waiting to be discovered, and so I certainly discovered a lot of it for myself in writing Have Yourself a Movie Little Christmas, and I hope that readers maybe are encouraged to go beyond their sort of annual touchstone Christmas movies to look for other stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, almost every year, it's a Wonderful Life and Christmas Vacation for my family, right? That's like the 2 we always watch. When it comes to music, my mom's always playing Barbra Streisand and Amy Grant. Those are the 2 she's always playing. So I mean, when you're a kid, you only have access to some of these titles, and as you're right, as you get older, you start to discover there's a lot of great, especially Christmas films that you might not have ever heard of. Older films, 40s, 50s films. And getting to our movie today, I had seen many of the Christmas Carol adaptations. I had not seen this version until yesterday.
Oh, wow. Well, I saw this for the first time as an adult myself. It would pop up on TV, when I was a kid, but it never really grabbed me. But my husband, when we lived in Texas, taught English as a second language. And it was sort of this kind of experimental school where everybody who attended that school was a recent arrival in the United States. And they would do a year in this intensely ESL school before going out to the rest of the Fort Worth public school system. And so he would do these sections throughout the year of like, these are the parts of the body, and these are, and there was a whole kind of holiday chunk that he would do during the year to sort of explain holidays as they're celebrated in the United States and the vocabulary that would go with them. And he would show them Scrooge as part of his, like, this is what Christmas is. So he showed me this movie when I would say 30, like in my early 30s. So it's not like one of those ones. I think for a lot of people, the Christmas movie that's their go-to is the one that they grew up on and they go back to every year, and it brings back those feelings of nostalgia, like so many other Christmas adjacent things do. But yeah, I saw this as an adult for the first time, and it blew me away. I loved it for my first viewing. I'm a big fan of Leslie Bricusse with or without Anthony Newley, so that certainly helped. But yeah, so this is I feel like you have to kind of defend your like childhood favorites when you're talking about Christmas stuff. But this one, I was completely old by the time I saw it.
Yeah, so the only thing I knew about this movie was that it was a musical and that it starred Albert Finney. And when I was starting to watch it, I was like, wait, this was shot in like early 1970. How old was Albert Finney? And I looked it up, and he was 33 years old when he made this. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I think gets to the heart of one of the things that I love best about this movie is that there are very, very few examples, certainly outside of animation, where the same actor plays young Scrooge and old Scrooge.
Okay.
And Finney does that with the help of a lot of latex, obviously. And I think it makes a real difference. I think it really gives this movie an emotional heft that maybe some of the other versions don't have.
Yeah. So let's get into the movie. I mean, I have some background information on it. We can touch on a little bit as we go on. But let's start with just, your feelings about this movie. Why is it one of your favorite Christmas movies? What about it really rings true for you as, one of the strongest Christmas Carol adaptations?
Well, I am a fan of musicals, so I mean, like that's that's already a genre where I'm like, okay, I'm in,
Yeah.
and certainly there are no shortage of musical versions of this particular story, but I don't know. There's something there's a real sumptuousness to this movie. Like I watched a lot of Christmas carols when I was writing the book, and I realized it's so hard to get just the granular aspects of this wrong in terms of you see movies where the light is too bright. This is supposed to be foggy, wintry, industrial revolution London of the 19th century. And sometimes it's like, what, did we shoot this in Malibu? Like, it's so bright. What is going on here? And then also there's that thing of like, where you can tell they built this much London and we're just gonna we're gonna shoot it from this side and we're gonna shoot it from that side, and this one, like they did it at Shepperton and it's a big set, and so there's a lot of places for people to go to and for the camera to travel to, and so we get this neighborhood and that neighborhood and these markets and where the Cratchits live, and it doesn't feel really hemmed in that way. It is part of that kind of post Sound of Music school of musicals, where the bigger the better, and we're going to cast a big name whether or not they can sing, and we're going to fill the streets of London with dancing cockneys and all that stuff, but it all works for me.
Yeah, no, this was shot at Shepperton Studios, which from my research, was the same studio used for Oliver 2 years before.
Yes.
So, another Charles Dickens adaptation. That film would go on to win the Best Picture of that year.
Right.
I was kind of surprised to see that this version of A Christmas Carol did not get a Best Picture nomination. It only received 4 nominations in the technical categories. So was this not a beloved film at the end of 1970? I feel like people would have really loved this movie.
Yeah, it was not a giant hit. And,
Okay.
I think also you have to remember that by 1970, the post Sound of Music musical was dying on the vine.
Yeah.
It was like bankrupting or coming close to bankrupting a lot of major studios. I mean, 20th Century Fox barely recovered from Cleopatra and Hello Dolly. Like those were the 2 movies of the 1960s that just emptied their coffers, and it was only through relatively scrappy films like MASH and Patton and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that they sort of got their mojo back. But the reason that Century City exists in Los Angeles today is because Fox sold off big chunks of their backlot to be commercially developed, because they were just bleeding money from these movies. And so I think the musicals were really starting to fall out of favor by 1970. Obviously, you had a younger, hipper audience that was more interested in Easy Rider and kind of films like that, than these were sort of considered these elephantine musicals. And I think also on the heels of Oliver, it kind of felt like, we've seen this. We've been down this, this path before, and we don't need to do it again. And so I think it's a movie that 50 years down the road, we can now sort of admire it on its own and not have to put it in the context of coming 2 years after Oliver and being part of this wave of a genre that was beginning to die out.
Yeah, you're right. So 1970, I mean, the big hits of that year were movies like MASH and Five Easy Pieces, right? These movies that are going against the grain of the kind of films we got, even just 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, you look at Julie Andrews was doing like a musical almost every year at the end of the 60s, and each one is more of a flop than
exactly.
The last
yeah,
one, right?
Star and Darling Lily, not really setting the world on fire.
Yeah, but I mean, despite all that, it's such a strong film, and it's kind of disappointing to know that it wasn't a huge hit at the time. But now, as you say, we can discover it 50 years on and see that it absolutely is one of the strongest Christmas Carol adaptations. In my research, there's dozens and dozens of films.
Yeah, it is the most adapted work
Okay.
of fiction, according to somebody who did a study on this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the one that I grew up with, I was born in the early 80s, was A Muppet Christmas Carol, right?
Sure,
That's
yeah.
the first one I saw with my family in the theater. So that's kind of the one I know well. So films of like the 60s, 70s, 80s weren't necessarily the ones I was looking at until much later. And, you know, I'm kind of upset at my parents right now for not introducing me to this one. This is a great adaptation.
Yeah, it is, and I think it is kind of been a slow build of rediscovery. Like there wasn't, you know, a Blu-ray release, for example, until fairly recently. The soundtrack has only ever been released on vinyl. Like there was never any kind of like, you know, and there are, I mean, I have a 3-disc Goodbye Mr. Chips soundtrack, you know, which is also a Leslie Bricusse thing, which is a super flop of that period of the big musicals. And yet there are labels that are catering to like the hardcore soundtrack nerds, where they will find like, you know, the demos and the, you know, these songs that were in the background in a scene or that got cut or whatever. No one has done that for Scrooge yet. So it's a movie that has very kind of slowly rebuilt this reputation. I think this week, as of the beginning of November 2020, it's available as a digital streaming title for the first time.
Possibly because of the 50th anniversary, right?
Yes,
Some people can
Paramount is giving it that push. But so yeah, and like TCM airs it now, so I think it's starting to like it's getting in front of people's eyeballs in a way that it hasn't before. But yeah, sometimes these movies just kind of like, if they don't immediately make an impression, or like critics at the time don't care, and believe me, critics at the time not liking a new Christmas movie is a thing I discovered in my research always happens, because Christmas movies tend to be like really sentimental and, you know, like not the kind of thing that it's cool to say you dig. But yeah, again, I think it is a movie that people are finding now, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and something I loved about the movie while watching it was just that it was a musical, and I was like, how is every adaptation of this story not a musical? Because it felt so appropriate for the story, you know?
Yeah, that my husband says this was the first one that he saw in a movie theater, and he just assumed that it was always going to be a musical. It was kind of shocked to discover later that, oh no, this is the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, because
he was 6 years old, he asks me to find out.
So there was, in my research, I found they did do like a stage adaptation at some point in the 1990s. I'm not very sure if it was super popular, because I didn't know of it until now.
Yeah, I've read about it, and I know people who have seen or been in versions of it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the songs are really quite good. And so it does loan itself to become that kind of spectacle. And there is such a hunger for seasonal stage entertainment. Like you read about dance companies who basically like support the entire year based on the Nutcracker. Exactly. That's a gimme that like people will buy tickets for. And again, I think the same with theater companies and A Christmas Carol, whether it's musical or non-musical. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that somebody would have converted this into a stage show. And I think Bricusse may have actually composed some original material for the stage that are like songs that weren't in the movie.
Yeah, and some other things I liked about this movie is it doesn't go exactly the way that every other adaptation goes. We actually get to go to hell in this one, which I mean, and maybe that's in a couple others, but I could not remember that being a part of some other versions.
I think there might be one or two where it does, but there's so many adaptations where the ghost of Christmas Future shows him his own tombstone, and that freaks him out. It's like, well, you knew you were gonna die at some point, right? This isn't news. So I like that this one kind of really hammers home the, you know, you're not just going to die. You will spend eternity like wrapped in the heaviest chains, you know, and you know, and Dickens does give you Marley being weighed down by his own chain. So like they're following up on something that's in the original, this notion of like, yeah, you are forging in life like a really, really bad afterlife for yourself if you don't fix it and fast.
Yeah, you're right. I feel like he just looks down at the grave, you know, he sees the plot in the cemetery, and then it's like, oh, and then he wakes up. This one, it's not only goes to hell, like they bring out the giant chain that they like wrap him up with. I'm like, oh my God, you know, this is extreme. But I feel like that helps like bring him back to life at the end when he wakes up. And, you know, absolutely. I feel like his, you know, when he is becoming a better man in those last few minutes, I feel like this movie earns it more than maybe some of the other adaptations. And I think part of that is Albert Finney's performance too. He's so great in this. I was actually emotionally moved at the end of this, and I know this story very well, as most of us do, right? So I thought for the film to pull that off, I said, okay, this is a really strong film.
Albert Finney asking the nephew to forgive him and telling the nephew's wife that he would like to come over for lunch. I cry every time. And I've seen this movie at least 10 times.
Yeah.
And that just always gets me. And a lot of other Christmas carols don't pull that off. And I think, you know, it's funny. I just watched I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but a new movie that's coming up that borrows a lot from A Christmas Carol.
Okay.
And it reminded me that the tricky thing for an actor or actress to pull off in this role is that you have to not just be mean, despicable, you know, miserly Scrooge, but then you have to make the pivot at the end and be convincing as nice, generous, redeemed Scrooge. And that's a tricky one because it's a real shift. And I think Finney pulls it off really well. And the movie gives him the space to do that. We went to a screening of Scrooge at the American Cinematheque in Los Angeles.
Oh, cool.
And director Ronald Neame was still alive and he spoke afterwards. And you could tell that everybody there was like, they were fans of this movie. They'd seen it a bunch of times. And so he was doing this Q&A and somebody said, well, so when you see the film now, is there anything that you would go back and change? He goes, I think I would maybe shorten the ending. And no joke, all these people in the audience were like, no, like don't touch it, because this movie gives you, like, Scrooge wakes up and they reprise like every song in the movie for like 20 minutes, and like he puts on the Father Christmas outfit and he buys the toys and he buys the turkey and there's a handbell choir and there's like, I mean, it just like ratchets it up and up and up, and it is, if you're the right kind of Christmas movie person, nirvana. It's like, I think it lasts like 17 minutes, that final segment, and it's delicious.
Yeah, I mean, the musical numbers throughout most of the movie are kind of subtle, right? I mean, it's sometimes they're just kind of walking and singing. But you get to the end of this movie when they're saying that thank you very much, and they're running down the street, and Ronald Neame and the cinematographer, they're moving the camera along with the characters, and it's like a great musical sequence, and there's so much celebratory like joy in that moment. I don't know how anyone could reach the end of this movie and be like, well, it was okay. But like after that, I was like, I want like one more little moment with just him. And then we get that little final tag of him walking up to the door by himself. I just thought that was a perfect way to end the movie after such a giant musical sequence like that.
Yeah. They know exactly what they're doing. And it's interesting because, again, like that kind of thing had been so played out by the early 70s that, like, one of the anecdotes you always hear about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which came out, I think, the following year.
Yep, June of 71, yeah.
Yeah, also Leslie Bricusse with Anthony Newley writing those songs. They envisioned that I've Got a Golden Ticket would end with like a big dancing in the street and the whole neighborhood, like, you know,
everyone going down the street.
Exactly. Yeah. And the director's like, no. We are not going crazy until we go into the factory. Like, I want the outside world to be a recognizable outside world, and then the factory is where all the insanity happens. So they were like, nope, it's going to be Charlie and the grandpa in the house. That's it. No chorus in the streets. No like dozens of bricklayers, you know, doing a, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like, and so that, and so Scrooge is coming at the end of this moment of where every studio was chasing that Sound of Music, Mary Poppins dragon. And so that's, I think, why that movie wasn't as loved in the 1970s as it is now, because we're not sick to death of that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the screenwriter who directed this movie. So you mentioned Leslie Bricusse, who wrote the screenplay to Scrooge and also did the music, right? Which is something I feel like I don't hear that very often. Wrote the script and did the music. And then the director was a former cinematographer before he got into directing. So both of these figures kind of, you know, put their toes in different kinds of mediums. It's not just directing and screenwriting. I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit about
I think part of what you see with that period of musicals being such a huge deal in the movies is that a lot of lyricists, certainly, I think, were stepping up. So like Alan J. Lerner, you know, who had done My Fair Lady, you know, half of Lerner and Lowe, he stepped up a lot and was doing a lot of writing. He wrote the Paint Your Wagon movie and some other stuff. But yeah, it wasn't, you know, there's a lot of configurations that we don't see anymore that were more likely back then. Like, for example, in the late 60s, early 70s, or at least let's say in the 60s, you saw a lot more writer producers. So like somebody like Larry Kramer, for instance, who got an Oscar nomination for doing the Women in Love adaptation, was also the producer of the film. And he would, I interviewed him about it later, and he would talk about sort of writing roughshod on Ken Russell to keep him from getting too Ken Russell about it all. But then in the 70s, you talk about, like you said, movies like Five Easy Pieces and MASH, the director was getting so powerful that they did not want to be second guessed by their screenwriter also acting as their producer. So you see more director producers who are either doing their own writing or like getting, taking a script and doing whatever they want with it. There was this moment of the sort of lyricist getting kicked upstairs to screenwriter, and Brickus was part of that.
Yeah, so interesting. And that Neem, I looked up his credits. I wasn't that familiar with the films he had made before this, but he had a lot of experience as a director. This was one of his bigger films. What do you think he brought to this movie as the director? Did he have any sort of stamp on this film, and visually or anything?
Yeah, I mean, like the ones of his that I probably know the best are this, and then a couple years later, the Poseidon Adventure. And I'd say, if anything, he has a gift for spectacle, but also intimacy, which are I think two very different hats to wear. So he can give you the scope of Victorian London. He can give you this like ocean liner turning upside down, but he can also like get very specific with characters. And I think a lot of times in epics, what we lose is the human element. And so he keeps an eye on both, which is, I think, a real skill. He'll give you dozens of dancers in the street, but he'll also give you like, Mrs. Cratchit, he'll give you these, the Fezziwig's daughter, like these characters that really pop and that really, come across. And so I think that's the real skill that he brings to this, is that he's giving Hollywood the kind of elephantine spectacle that they want, but he's never losing sight of the fact that this is a drama and these are characters, and they're the ones that are going to put this thing forward, not the visual effects, not the size and scope.
Yeah, I agree. He does such a great job with the intimate moments. Maybe my favorite moment in the film is that brief scene where we go to the cemetery and Bob Cratchit is like, kneeling at the grave of Tiny Tim. And you hear the subtle sound of, you hear the song that Tiny Tim was singing earlier in the film, but just kind of very subtly in the background. I thought that was so haunting. It's just such a great little detail added to that scene. Moments like that, I thought what made this movie stronger than your typical Christmas Carol.
I mean, the whole I think the love story between between Scrooge and Fezziwig's daughter, like no other movie does it better. Like that, there is a palpable kind of passion between the two of them, and him turning his back, and being more about making money than about her, I think really lands here, because you do see them as a viable couple, as a sexy couple. And again, I think that's where the Finney playing both aspects of Scrooge really comes in, because you see the sort of post Tom Jones lusty, horseback riding or I guess arrow shooting, in this case, Albert Finney, making eyes at this woman, even though her parents are chaperoning them. Like there is sex going on there between the two of them. Like there's real appeal. And then to see him grow cold towards her, and then to see him even later regret having done that, and it's all the same guy doing it. Man, like that just really lands for me.
Yeah, that scene is so moving when she leaves, and he kind of gets up, he kind of walks in the hallway, shouts her name a couple times, but then he goes, and then older Scrooge is like, no, go get her, go after her. Yeah, that scene really landed, and as you say, partly because it's so convincing, the old age makeup, that you really can see like how weathered he is, how down he is on his life, and how much life he actually had when he was younger. And this was made, I want to say 7 years after Tom Jones, and he still looks like about that, and he still looks really young. He still looks about the same. So that doesn't work in all of the Christmas Carol adaptations, but it definitely works in this one.
No question. And and this Finney also, this is 3 years after one of my favorite movies of all time, Two for the Road.
Two for the Road.
Where he very convincingly ages from like grad student to middle-aged dad.
does a better job of that than Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man when he's supposed to be like a college student and he looks like he's 35.
Indeed.
Yeah. So yeah, anything else you want to say about Albert Finney and the title role in this that we haven't talked about yet? I just thought he was fantastic in this. He won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. Yeah. Did not get an Oscar nomination. So, I mean, I don't know what happened there, but
yeah, again, I think people were kind of we're starting to get fed up with music, with the big musical in general. Yeah. But they were still, giving it sort of tech attention. I think the thing with Finney is like he is not a singer in the classical sense, but I think you look at him and Rex Harrison and other people in the period who knew how to act their way through a song, and they would sort of turn it into kind of a recitative, basically, where they're like half talking and half singing and half carrying a tune. But like, it's interesting if you, the big Scrooge's big redemption song before the whole crazy finale begins, if you go and listen to like Sammy Davis Jr.'s version of it, because, he did a lot of Brickus and Newley stuff on his own, he had a lot of Stop the World, I Want to Get Off music. That's like, oh, this is a song. Okay, like there is an actual tune here that one could sing if one felt like it. Finney is more kind of making it a monologue that has a bit of a musical flourish to it. But it's fine. It works. And it's like, frankly, I think because Scrooge is such a kind of a nasty character, him sort of breaking out with a tenor voice would be weird, but the way that Finney does, like that early song about cretinous wretches or whatever, I hate people.
I hate people. That was great.
I hate people should absolutely sound like that, because that's what somebody who hates people would sing like,
Yeah. So in my research, I saw Rex Harrison and Richard Harris were both offered the role before Finney came on board.
They were, as was Cary Grant, actually.
Cary Grant? What?
Yeah. Well, because again, it was like, they didn't have to be singers. Richard Harris had already done Camelot, and Rex Harrison had done, Dr. Dolittle and My Fair Lady, and not because of their singing prowess, it's because they were big names for other reasons. And then actually what happened was that the actor who plays Fred, the nephew in this movie, was Albert Finney's producing partner. They had like a company together, and so after the guy playing Fred had been cast and they were still looking for a Scrooge, he kind of brought Albert Finney into the production.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, because I mean, I assume he wouldn't have been the likeliest choice, a 33-year-old. He would be good for Scrooge, but it's kind of like a little masterstroke that someone took a chance on that idea, because he's great in this movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of times when you look at the films that you remember, you look at the production history, they didn't get their first choice. They kind of took a gamble on a thing, and then that wound up being exactly the way to go. So yeah, nobody said, oh, we should get a young Scrooge. But once they got a young Scrooge, I think it opened a lot of doors for them.
Yeah, and I think that's better than if you get an older actor and then they have to get a different actor playing the younger version. I just don't think that would have the same kind of power.
It could work. That's what most adaptations are, but I think this one's special because it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as I said, this movie, I really just enjoyed it all the way through. I thought the production design, the costume design was great. The visual effects, effects in this movie, I was like, how? Like, this is 8 years before Superman, and we have some pretty, I mean, not every shot in the movie, but some of them look really good for 1970s. Some of these effects, some of like the kind of the creepy gothic kind of ghost effects, and obviously the vision of hell at the end, like all of the technical that I mean, obviously it got 4 Oscar nominations, so other people were noticing too. But
that carriage that drives through his house, the ghost thing,
just that subtle effect of Bob Marley's head when he gets to the house for the first time, like that was nice. Or sorry, Jacob. Jacob.
I made the same.
Bob Cratchit, Jacob Marley. There you go.
I made the same mistake once in when I played College Bowl one time. They were like, "Who's the first ghost in Christmas Carol?" I was like, "Bob Marley." I was like, "No,
that's somebody else." Yeah. We haven't talked about Sir Alec Guinness. What do you think of him in this movie?
Yeah, no, I was going to say we definitely have to talk about all the ghosts in this movie. I think they're really fascinating.
Absolutely.
Alec Guinness is terrific. His Marley is so witheringly superior. He is a ton of fun. I love the whole, and again, you talk about the effects, the whole thing where he sits down next to the chair, not in the chair, is really great. And he apparently, the sort of rigging contraptions they put him in to make him float around, like I think broke a rib or something. It was not a great experience for him, but I think he gives a wonderful performance. And again, not a traditional singer, but the his song is perfectly ethereal and creepy and unsettling. He's a ton of fun.
Yeah, and I like that he comes back at the end. Usually, don't you only see Marley once, and then
then they're off.
Yeah,
but they given the way that they sort of expand that Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come thing, he's the perfect, kind of like way to put a button on that.
Yeah, and as you said, according to the research I looked at, that he did not necessarily have a great time making this movie. And I guess there was a musical number that was cut from the film that he was like the star of. Is that, you know anything more about that?
I don't know about that. I know he's got the one song about the Restless Souls, but I did not know there was more from him.
And I love the look to him. The pale the pale look to him was just so perfect. It didn't look too phony, too ghost-like. Yeah. Like, I really like that about it, and it was just kind of welcome to see him in a role like this. I had never seen him.
There's a lot of ways you can go with the the kerchief on his head to sort of like hold the head together, and there have been some versions that are a little more effectsy, or the animated ones where that comes off and the jaw just hangs down. I mean, this is a ghost story, and I guess you can sort of decide like how much you want to lean into the sort of more goth aspects of it all.
Yeah, there's so many versions of this that you as the director, you have to say, okay, how grotesque do I want to go with this? Do I make it just more realistic? So it's kind of different for everybody. Let's talk about the other three ghosts. What did you think of this film's three ghosts?
So Dame Edith Evans as the Ghost of Christmas Past. Perfection.
Yes, I love her.
And I think I haven't seen a movie where they totally pull off the way it's described in the book, which is that it's a candle, and it snuffs itself out at the end. Like that's great on the page. Visually, I don't know that everybody's quite nailed it as 100%. Some get it better than others, but they totally abandon that in this one, and they make her this sort of like grande dame with a big fur muff and a bright red dress. I think she's great. I love that all the ghosts in this one sort of roll their eyes at Scrooge and his objections and his claims of whatever, which is how you need to do it, because on the road to getting him to redemption, he's doing nothing but sort of rationalizing everything. I think she's great. And then I would say, if it weren't for Edward Woodward in the 1984 George C. Scott TV version, Kenneth More would be my absolute favorite Ghost of Christmas Present. He's a tie. They're both really terrific, but that number is great. The other part of this movie that always makes me cry is I Like Life. The song that the Ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge sing together. But like the whole the just sheer dazzling array of food and whatnot, really matches the Dickens description. The fact that like he shines so brightly that Scrooge can't even see him at first. I think that's great. And then Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, it's always the sort of spectral skeleton hand, bony finger pointing. And it's the best one for me is, I don't know if you've seen a Diva's Christmas Carol with Vanessa Williams.
No, I didn't even know. I hadn't heard of that one.
Oh, it's a lot of fun, from the year 2000. I think
2000. Okay.
VH1 produced it, and the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is basically an episode of VH1's Behind the Music. Which, if you're a pop star, that is some terrifying glimpse into what's to come. But it's fine. It works pretty well. I think there might be a part where you can either see the guy's face or you can see a camera. Like there's one of the goofs of this movie I saw listed somewhere involves the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. But past and present, I just think are so well put together, and they so well cast and visually just like really bring it.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I thought the first two were great. I like that we actually get a musical number with Ghost of Christmas Present. I thought because we don't really get one with the Ghost of Christmas Past, right? So I thought maybe does she sing at all in the movie? I can't remember. She doesn't sing, right?
She does not
like,
sing.
Okay.
There's the children sing sing the
Yeah.
Christmas Carol, which gets reprised later, and then we get the whole love song between
Yeah.
is she Belle in this movie? She's not always Belle, but anyway, the
Mhm.
Fezziwig's daughter and
Yeah.
Scrooge. So all of that happens during the Christmas Past section.
Yeah. So when we got a song from Ghost of Christmas Present, I was like, is Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come gonna sing? Who is it gonna look like? So I was like a little let down, like, okay, it's just the guy in the cloak.
Sure, yeah, they're not gonna give us Jack Skellington at the end.
Yeah, but
it was funny watching so many adaptations all together. Like I kind of had this checklist going, like, are we going to get Ignorance and Want? Are we going to get the guys in the lighthouse celebrating Christmas? Are we going to get the poor married couple who are like relieved that Scrooge is dead? Like there's all these segments in the Dickens that sometimes pop up and sometimes don't, and so after a while you just sort of like kind of check off like, oh, we did that one but not that one, you know.
Yeah, but I like the skeleton that came like onto his face in that one shot. That was like a nice little detail. Yeah, so that all worked really well. You know, as I said, like that last part in hell was so great. I was like this should be in every version. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's a nice addition.
Any other favorite scenes that we haven't talked about? I'm trying to think of any other scenes from the film we didn't touch on. I mean, the very beginning of the movie, first off, I love the opening titles. It's gorgeous, like watercolor.
Yeah, Ronald Searle did Ronald Searle? I can't remember. But yeah, this great illustrator did all of those. And if you look online, you can see like a lot. I don't know if there's been a book of them, but you can find them, and they're all really individually gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. The first 10+ minutes is a pretty like traditional adaptation. There's not really any singing yet, right? So it kind of starts a little bit more traditional, and then we slowly get into some songs, and then by the time Jacob Marley shows up, we're really into something brand new, at least at the time, because if I know this correctly, this was the first live action adaptation in color. Is that correct?
Oh,
for a film, for like for a theatrical
film. That might well be. I never thought about it that way, right? But yeah, because there are a lot of post Scrooge Christmas carols, but before this, there was the MGM 1938 one with Reginald Owen. There was the legendary, I guess, 1951 Alistair Sim version. Yep. There had been like some silent ones. There was a sort of early talkie version. But yeah, this may well have been the first one in color. You're right.
Yeah, from my research, the first one was like 1901 or 1902. Like they were making the story very early. I forgot that this story was published in 1843. I mean, this is a very, very old story.
And almost immediately started being like performed on stage and like public readings. Like it took off immediately. So yeah, it's not surprising that in the dawn of cinema this was a go-to thing. I mean, to the point where like Dickens had to do a lot of lawsuits.
Oh, really?
From people trying to like either print their own versions or do stage versions that he wasn't getting. That they weren't paying rights to him about. I didn't like the movie, but if you read the book, The Man Who Invented Christmas, it is a fascinating history of the creation of A Christmas Carol, the impact of A Christmas Carol, and also like how immediately popular it was.
Yeah. So, again, I thought this was a great movie. I've been watching, since 3 years ago, 2017, I've kind of made it this mission to look at a lot of films from 50 years ago. And then I just started this podcast now looking at films of 1970. This is, maybe not as strong as something like Five Easy Pieces, like maybe not of its time as much as some other films of 1970, but I would consider this one of the best films released in 1970 from all the many that I've been watching this year. I thought it was just really, really great.
Yeah, I think it's one that holds up. And again, like so often, there's I think Nathan Rabin, who's written for a lot of different sites and who I think is a really great kind of cultural commentator, was doing a column for somebody for a while called Forgot Busters, which are like movies that were really popular when they came out and then nobody remembers them later, and I think that happens a lot. And then the opposite happens where, again, like this movie, the timing was just off. It was people were sick of big musicals. Oliver had just come out, so it just kind of felt like a sort of, we're doing this again with the Dickens property, But once you separate a movie from its original marketing and its original kind of cultural context, it can be its own thing. And that, again, like It's a Wonderful Life is the classic example. flopped when it came out, you know. And you know, so little regarded that it went into the public domain, and then that's when it kind of found its audience, you know. And now we look at it as this kind of unimpeachable masterpiece of everything, much less just of Christmas. And so I think Scrooge is undergoing a similar trajectory where, you know, 1970 audiences yawned and weren't interested, but now we can look at it and kind of take it for its own merits and go, oh no, there's really a lot to like here. Yeah, Ronald Searle, sorry, is the name of the guy who does the hand-painted opening titles, and they really are gorgeous. I would send people to a website called Art of the Title. They do a whole long article about it. It's really interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of cases of films that just for whatever reason aren't loved or, you know, critically acclaimed at the time, but 50 years later, if it's a strong film, the word's going to get out. And I'm going to be singing the praises of this movie all throughout this holiday season and telling people that I know who might not, you know, maybe haven't seen it, maybe we're too young at the time before it came out. I'm going to tell them to check this one out because it's really one of the better Christmas Carol adaptations for sure.
Excellent. Yes. Join me in banging the drum. I'll bring up one thing that I am not crazy about in this one, but which I am generally not crazy about in almost every Christmas Carol adaptation. And that is Tiny Tim.
Okay.
Tiny Tim is such a Victorian device to make readers cry. And, you know, there's a famous Oscar Wilde quote, and it's like, well, like one would have to have a heart of stone to read The Death of Little Nell without laughing. And I think Tiny Tim totally falls into that category. The poor guy. And there is an inclination, I think, for directors to lean into that and make the character just this sort of wet-eyed moppet. And this movie does that too. And I find I almost always skip his song because it's just too much for me. I agree with you. It is nice to have it in the background when Bob Cratchit goes to his grave during the Christmas Yet to Come part. But as an actual number that is focused on this kid, and no shade on this kid because he was probably like 6 at the time and doing exactly what they asked him to do. But oof, too much for me.
That's when the fast forward comes out. Just that one scene.
It's like how, like, if you're watching Willy Wonka and you always go to the bathroom during Cheer Up Charlie, this is that song for me in this movie.
That's totally true. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, one of my favorite movies. And
same here.
That one,
and you get to do it next year.
Yes, I get to do it next summer. So excited to talk about that. And it's so funny that you say that because that is the one scene I'm like, cheer up. It's like, okay. I mean, and it's a long song, like, and it just the movie just stops. But
and it's they don't even really. You can tell they're like they're not even. They don't try to come with something interesting visually to do with it. It's like mom's just gonna stand there and sing this song and kid's gonna walk home sad, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yes, you know, thank you so much for doing this for me. I wanted to end with 2 little segments. The first one's called the Divine Double Feature, where we pick like a contemporary film that might make for a good double feature with Scrooge. I don't know if you had time to think about this at all, and it can just be a more modern Christmas Carol adaptation if you'd like. But is there anything in the last like 20 years that you think would like be a kind of a cool movie to show right, like directly after Scrooge ends? Did you think of anything for that?
I would actually go back to one that I mentioned during the episode. A Diva's Christmas Carol. It's a lot of fun. And you know, the thing about this story is that it's so malleable, and you can, you know, the idea that this was a musical was like, what? Even though it's not even the first musical version, there was a TV film made years earlier called The Stingiest Man in Town for American TV that was later animated, I think, by Rankin Bass. Then what got really popular starting in about the 80s, I want to say, was turning Scrooge into a ruthless businesswoman. And that's when you get Ebby starring Susan Lucci, and Ms. Scrooge with Cicely Tyson, and even A Carol Christmas with Tori Spelling, which is better than you might think it is. But my favorite of that particular subgenre is A Diva's Christmas Carol. Vanessa Williams is just like chewing the scenery with aplomb. You know, The Ghost of Christmas Present is played by Kathy Griffin. You know, it has a lot of fun with the tropes of things. And so I that's probably, you know, once you've watched Scrooge, once you've watched, you know, the Alistair Sim version and, you know, the sort of like regarded classics, check out Divas. It's pretty fun.
Is that available anywhere? Is that
it's all, I know it's on DVD, and it might even be streaming.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm totally gonna check that out. I was not aware of that one before you brought it up. I went with a non-musical, not a Christmas Carol. I was just thinking back, what are some movies I really loved in the last year or two? And I went to Little Women, the film released last year, which has a lot of great a lot of great Christmas imagery, right? And also an emotional story, great performances, period film, based on a famous work from the 1800s. So I would go with, like, if you wanted to look at a film from 1970 and then something with some similar ideas and, Christmas imagery, for a film released almost 50 years later, I thought Greta Gerwig's Little Women would be kind of a fun one to put on.
That was my favorite film of 2019.
Oh, it was. That's right. It was your favorite film.
I totally endorse this choice.
Cool. And then my last segment is called Beyond the Flick, where we pick, just something affiliated with the movie and pick our 3 favorites. So obviously with this one, I thought it'd be fun to pick our favorite Christmas Carol adaptations. So do you have like 2 or 3 favorites that you could recommend to our listeners?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think the George C. Scott version from 1984 is really great. And
I have not seen it.
Very straightforward.
I'm going to watch it. Yeah,
but very well done. I think the Alistair Sim one is really terrific, and that one actually, it's well known for his performance as Scrooge, which is terrific. But they also have some really clever writing ideas, which is mainly that. That's the first one that I saw where they basically come up with the notion that Scrooge and Marley got together and put Fezziwig out of business.
Oh, okay.
So, which makes him just a little more awful, and it also, I think, kind of brings a more of an undercurrent of tragedy to the to the fact that he and Fezziwig's daughter break up, because not only is Scrooge too greedy to marry her, he's destroyed her father's business. So it's like, all right, that's awful. I love it. And then, just because this one is, I think, maybe not as well known to folks, but it did get a DVD release recently and might also be streaming. There's a film called An American Christmas Carol that was made for American TV in the 1970s, starring Henry Winkler.
Oh, wow.
And it is set during the Depression.
Oh, okay.
And it works better than you would think. And the old age makeup, not nearly as good as it is in Scrooge, but that's kind of the one caveat. Otherwise, I think it's a really, it's smart and sentimental and well put together.
Does Henry Winkler play Scrooge?
Henry Winkler plays the Scrooge character.
Interesting. Yeah. So it would have been like Happy Days era, like later in the
Yes, like 76, 77. But
that's so cool.
Quite good now.
Yeah. So my favorite, the 1951 version you mentioned, I think is easily one of the strongest. I really love, as much as I love Scrooge, there is something about black and white to this story that always kind of gives me the nostalgic feels, right? One of the earliest ones I saw was the 1938 version starring Reginald Owen.
Yeah, for MGM.
A really strong film. Really short. It's like an hour. It's not very long.
Yes. But it's a very good kids first Scrooge.
That was a good kids one. Yeah.
If not Muppets,
Yeah. And then the other one was the Muppets, just because that's the first one I saw as a kid. I watched it a lot during Christmas when I was younger. I haven't seen it in many years. Are you not a big fan of the Muppets one with Michael Caine?
I like it. I think there's a lot to like about it. I didn't grow up with it, so I don't have that same attachment to it. And I have to say, like, as much as I love the Paul Williams songs in the Muppet movie, I don't think they're that strong in Muppet Christmas Carol. But I get a lot of stink eye when I say this to like people in their 30s. So like, if it's your Christmas Carol, I get it and I honor that. Just not my thing.
So I think Scrooge will be definitely in my top 2 or 3. I'm going to sit with it for a little while because I just watched it yesterday. But I think in the years to come, that might kind of creep up on the list. And I have to ask you, what are your opinions about the Jim Carrey version?
Oh, man. I am not in general a fan of the Robert Zemeckis motion capture thing. Like, I thought Beowulf was okay, but I cannot stand the Polar Express.
Okay, me too.
And I don't think his A Christmas Carol works very well. Yeah. Like, I mean, when you've got like Gary Oldman's face as Tiny Tim, it's like, what are we doing here? You're freaking me out with this. And then, like, also, did we need a carriage chase in?
That's right. That's right.
Think so. Not really one of my favorites, unfortunately.
When he's like hanging off the carriage.
Yes, all of that stuff. It's like, what do you really think we're going to get bored? And then, like, not only that, it's, I think, on the one hand, taking these crazy liberties with Dickens and throwing in these like action sequences, but then like keeping these really specific lines of dialogue that if you're not reading like the annotated version, you don't even know what they're talking about. Like, why are suddenly Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present having an argument about whether or not bakeries should be open on Sundays? It's like that is so deep into the Victorian arcana of this story. And there is a really good annotated version, by the way, if you're a fan of the book.
Okay.
Michael Patrick Hearn like footnotes everything. If you want to know what the weights and measures are and what the money amounts are and like the jokes in this book that don't make any sense centuries later, like he explains everything. And it's a really engrossing read if you've read the story and love it and are still like, wait, what's a dram? What's a
great.
How much is a shilling? All that stuff.
Yeah, last year ago Halloween, there was a really great like annotation of Frankenstein, which is kind of a dry read if you're just reading it, on its own. But to have like those annotations that kind of give you a little background info and tell you a little bit more about it, I would love to read an annotation of A Christmas Carol. That would be fantastic. So thanks for that recommendation.
Sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Alonso, for doing this for me. This was a thrill.
This was a treat. I will talk about like find me on a street corner and I will talk to you about Scrooge.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would love to have you come back for a Christmas movie or a non-Christmas movie. I'll be talking about the 1970s for a long, long time to come here. So.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is the first movie I remember seeing in a theater as a 4-year-old. Cool. So I'm just saying, let me know. I'd be happy to come talk about that.
Oh my gosh, that would be fantastic. One of my favorite movies for sure. So yeah, is there anything else you wanted to tell our listeners where they can find you? We've kind of talked about it mostly at the beginning. Do you have any like Twitter handles or anything?
Sure. I'm at A Duralde on Twitter. AD as in David, URALDE, and it's a mix of Christmas and radical socialism, so just get ready for that. And then the book is Have Yourself a Movie Little Christmas. You can still get it at Amazon and the various places. It's a Kindle as well as being a Dead Tree edition. Please check out my podcast, Linoleum Knife, Who Shot Ya, Breakfast All Day, and A Film and a Movie, and support this program as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, but, you're doing so many great things for film history. You're a big film critic hero of mine, Alonso. So this was an absolute thrill. Sweet. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone for listening to Film at 50. You can find us at filmat50.com, all the socials, and you can email us at 50 years ago in film at gmail.com. There's also a Patreon page with at least 2 exclusive episodes every month, so check that out as well. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.